Hello everyone! In this week's video I am unboxing a ScrawlrBox and I will create an illustration with the supplies inside. So let's get started! So this box is actually from a month or two ago, but I'm just now making a video on it. Anyways, let's see what's inside. First we have this Karin Brush Marker Pro. I got the colors Gold, Lilac, Lush Green, and the Colorless Blender. I was really excited about the Colorless Blender. I actually have some of these markers. Thankfully the only repeat color I got was Lilac. I really like to use these in my sketchbook. The colors are really bright and vibrant and they're really fun to use. Next we have two Carin Febra pens. That's really hard to say and I'm probably not saying it right. According to information provided by ScrawlrBox, the stroke of this artist quality Febra tipped coloring pen is transformed on contact with water to create surprising effects. I end up really disliking this marker, but I'll talk about that later. Next we have this Carin Edelweiss pencil. I don't think I'm saying any of that right either. It also has this eraser that goes on the back of it, so that's nifty. Next we have this art line drawing system pen. It has a super tiny nib and the ink is water resistant, which is really nice because we'll be working with water. The last art supply we have is this Spectrum Noir Aquata. At first I thought this was a water brush and I was confused as to why there was some red ink in the brush chamber area. When I went to fill this with water, I was surprised to find that it was actually filled with red ink. Then we have this candy, two stickers. I was so excited about the bonus feather sticker. It's so cute. Some art created by Serena Renee. It's very pretty art. I really like the pastel colors. The theme for this box is plumage, so that's why there are lots of feathers. Then we have two sheets of paper. So that is all that came in this box. Now that we've looked at all the supplies, let's go test them out. I start by swatching the Carrion Markers. One thing that is really cool about these markers is that if you touch the tip of the markers together, the ink from the top marker will go into the bottom marker. Then when you color, you can create gradients. The ink also spreads with water. You can get really cool effects by using water with these. For the thinner blue and yellow markers, they also spread with water. ScrawlrBox mentioned you'll get cool effects if you touch the markers to water, so I put some water down and tried putting the marker into it, and you do get a really cool effect and it is pretty neat, but I end up really not liking this later on. I didn't test out the Aquatint brush marker because, like I mentioned, I didn't know it was filled with ink. So now that I've tested all of the supplies, I'm going to start working on the picture. So I start by sketching digitally in Clip Studio Paint. I like to sketch digitally just because I find it easier and I can move things around and easily change things. And it's just kind of nice sketching digitally. So this month's theme, like I mentioned, is plumage. The colors that I got made me think of peacock feathers, and so I wanted to draw a girl in like a pretty dress, and then at the back we have a whole bunch of peacock feathers. So that was my idea for this picture. At first I was thinking of drawing a guy because boy peacocks are actually the ones that have the super pretty feathers. But then I couldn't think of a way to make it work for a guy. I guess I could have done the same thing kind of like I did for the girl, but I liked the idea better with a girl, so I went with a girl instead of a guy. So I'm kind of planning out how I want all of the feathers to fan out and how I want them to be all laid out behind her. This was actually quite a process. I was kind of confused by the peacock feathers. And then for the girl, I have her eyes closed and I wanted her to look kind of regal and maybe just kind of elegant, and she looks kind of happy and relaxed. So now I'm starting to do my cleanup sketch, and I actually started working on this picture before I had opened the ScrawlrBox officially. I took a peek and I saw the supplies inside and what the theme was, but I didn't actually look at the paper that came with the box. I thought the paper was the same size as the box, but then later on when I grabbed the paper, it was actually really tall and not very wide. And so I end up not using a lot of the feathers, but I still had to plan them out anyways because you can kind of see them on the sides. But the paper was much smaller than I thought it would be, and so I actually make the feathers overall kind of bigger. That way I could easily fill in the details. So now I'm starting to kind of clean up the peacock feathers a little bit and trying to get an idea for how they look. I was looking up a whole bunch of different references on my phone, and then I have the peacock feather, and then I draw it down to where I want it to stop, and then I just keep making copies of the peacock feather and like rotating it. That way it could all be kind of similar. I have a row that's kind of taller, and then I have a row that's kind of shorter. And like I mentioned, later on, after I saw how big the paper is, I actually make the peacock feathers larger. So I actually end up not using these ones at all. I have to completely redo them later, but it went a lot quicker later because I knew what I was doing a bit more. So I have the one row that's above her, and it's kind of going up and down with taller ones and shorter ones. And then I kind of have another shorter row. That way it's just kind of a little bit more interesting and there's more color. So after I finished the sketching on the computer, I printed out my sketch and used my light box to trace it onto the paper. I decided to use the pencil that came in the ScrawlrBox to trace it onto the paper. I did think about using the liner, but I wasn't sure which parts of the picture I'd want to use the liner for and which parts I'd want to use the pencil for, because I didn't want to use liner on everything, and I knew I didn't want to use liner on the feathers because I thought that just make them a little bit too cartoony, and I wanted them to look a little bit more realistic and flowy and not quite so like tight and controlled. I wanted them to be a little bit more, I don't know how to describe it, just more flowy and pretty and not so controlled. I did use the liner on her face because I wanted the parts of her face to kind of stand out, and I also end up using the liner a lot later on her. So now that I have my sketch on the paper from the ScrawlrBox, I start coloring. I decided to start by coloring the peacock feathers, and I was kind of dumb. I should have started by coloring one of the ones down in the corner because I didn't totally know what I was doing yet, and I was feeling pretty confident going into this picture because, like I mentioned, I've used these Karin brush markers before. But yeah, I just messed up a lot. I was thinking of these as markers, but I should have been thinking of them as watercolors, because up here I was coloring everything at once, but then everything was just bleeding into each other. Like the blue was going into the yellow, and then the yellow was going into the teal, and everything was just mushing together. But for the peacock feathers, I make a line with the teal color, or the lush green, I think is the color it's called. And then I take a tiny brush and then I fan out the ink from the marker to give it a slight feathery texture. And then later on I go in with the colorless blender and the marker and I add more detail that way. This part took quite a while. Overall, the peacock feathers I think was the majority of this picture because there were so many peacock feathers to color. And so here's where I start using the colorless blender. I would take the lush green marker and then put it on top of the colorless blender so that the colorless blender would get some of the color. And then the lush green would be lighter because it was in the colorless blender. And then I would add all of the detail to make it a little bit darker and to give all of the little strands of feathers from the peacock feathers. So after finishing all of the little feathery bits along the edges of the feathers, I went in and started coloring the kind of tealish outline of the feathers for all of them. So for these top ones, they have kind of the feather parts that poke out. And then I add the details of the feathers going off of them a bit. I was planning for the feathers to not get super dark, but by the time I had started using the lush green a lot, it started to get where I needed to use it just pretty much straight from the marker, because or else everything kind of started blending together. So like I mentioned, I didn't really know what I was doing for the first feather, and so since I did everything at once for the first feather, everything really blended together. I tried to do things a little bit smarter and wait for things to dry, so I did all of the teal. And then I went in and started using the gold. At first I used the yellow marker, but then I decided to use the gold because it looked a little bit closer to what peacock feathers look like. And this went pretty smoothly. The markers didn't bleed that badly into each other. And then after I colored with all of the gold, I went in and started using the blue, and I thought I waited long enough for it to not bleed into everything. But like right when I put that blue one down, if there's the slightest bit of like liquid that it can travel into, it will. I actually ended up using my brush mostly. The ink from that marker just loves to spread, and I just don't know how to stop it from spreading. I probably just should have waited maybe like 45 minutes or an hour or something, maybe to let the ink completely dry, but it looked dry, it felt dry, like it didn't show any signs of it still being wet at all, but then the ink would still just travel into it. For the darker parts of the peacock feathers, I put down a layer of purple and then I used a layer of blue. This kind of gave me a darker blue for the feathers. So at this point, I was pretty much done with the feathers. I was just kind of giving up at this point. I'm like, okay, it's good enough, I guess. So I started moving on to the girl, and I actually had a lot of fun coloring her hair. Her hair was so much fun to color. I would take the gold color and then I would apply it where I want it to be the darkest, and then I'd use the colorless blender to lighten it to where I wanted the highlights to be. And it was just so much fun coloring her hair, and I'm really happy I went with the yellow. At first I was gonna go with a dark purple or maybe the teal, but then I was like, that might blend into the feathers too much. And so I decided to go with the yellow, and I feel like it makes her really pop. And for her dress, I kind of wanted to try the same thing for the hair, so I was using the colorless blender for the dress. But for some reason, the purple just didn't want to blend as much as the yellow did. Like the yellow was blending so nicely with the colorless blender, but the purple just did not want to spread as much. So now I start coloring the skin with the Aquatint brush. It has a reddish ink in it, and then I use water to lighten it. And right here, disaster strikes, but my camera turned off and it didn't capture it. So I was coloring the skin, and I just wanted to add a little dab of the red ink from the marker, but then the ink from the red marker just came spewing out and made this ginormous glob. It went all over her shoulder area, and I was running around like a maniac trying to find a paper towel because I didn't have one next to me, and we were all out of paper towels. So I grabbed a tissue, and then yeah, it made this ginormous orange spot on her dress, and I was really sad. So to fix this little mishap, I colored in her dress completely with the dark purple. And I actually quite like the purple over the gradient, so I guess it's not totally bad that that happened. At least I was able to fix it a little bit. I was really happy I was able to give her a skin color though. I was planning to not color her skin, but then when I saw that I could use the Aquatint brush as a skin tone, I was happy I was able to color her skin a little bit. And then I ended up using the teal for the little shawl thing around her arms. And I thought the yellow of her hair was dry, but I guess it wasn't. It must have still been quite not dry enough, so the teal started blending into the yellow a little bit. These markers are a little bit frustrating because they are super reactive with water, and so they love to just merge together and blend together even when you don't totally want them to. So to make things feel a little bit more finished and cleaned up, I decided to outline the girl completely to help her stand out and just to help the piece feel a little bit more finished. So here's the finished art I created using the supplies from this ScrawlrBox. I do feel like the picture turned out kind of cool looking. Like if you look at it from far away, it does look kind of neat because the colors are super vibrant and there's all the feathers. But when you take a up-close look at it, you can see there's kind of a lot of mistakes. But overall, I feel like the picture turned out kind of neat. Thank you so much to my patrons, including Rachel, Andrew, Swinky, Bonnie, Now from Academy Games, Lucille, Robert, Tamalin, Pisatera, Anne, Eduardo, AJ, Nikki, Michael, Adam, Narichan, Dan, Panda Bear, Daniel, Dozar89, Aaron, and Patrick. Thank you so much for being a patron and for your support. So thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!